Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to the studio. Today is Flower Farm week, so we haven't seen each other for a while. I took a couple of weeks off just doing some shorts because I went to the H&H America's Wholesale Quilting and Craft Show. I had a booth there. I do that every year, so I was also part of their art installation, which you may have seen in some shorts. And I'm putting together a little quick video for you to see some of the behind the scenes, but I didn't do a lot of filming. I just did a lot of business. And so I'm sorry we had to take a break from each other, but we're back as always, the second week of the month for Flower Farm. So today on Flower Farm, we're going to be working on two different blocks, but it's not a lot of sewing. We're doing a small block, we're making 4, and we're doing a larger block, we're making 2 of those. And so this would be a great time if you are behind a little bit, and I have to say I am actually a little bit behind. I didn't put together my second block yet from last month, so I can use this month to sort of catch up and just finish, and if I need anything done, I can finish it. So if you haven't done your leaflet blocks all the way, or any of the other things that we've done, the sprigs, the leaflets, which are the smaller blocks, or if you haven't finished the second one of your big blocks, now's the time to do it. This week, we're going to be working on block number 4 is on page 24, and it's called the Primrose block. And we've already, congratulations, finished all of our 24-inch squares. So we're working on 16-inch blocks this week, and we're only making 2. So that'll be great. We're reducing the size of our blocks a little bit. We're using a little bit less fabric, but we're not reducing a lot of the pieces. So we definitely want to be careful. I'm going to walk you through some tips and tricks on building these blocks. But the good news is our larger blocks are stitch and flip. We also are making block number 16, which I believe is on page 43, if I'm not mistaken. And that is our Primrose block. And I'll show you both blocks, what we have cut, and you can see, but they're behind me. This is Primrose right here, isn't she sweet? And then we also have our Primrose block, which is our little one right here, and that one is set on point. So this is one of those situations where you're going to be a confident beginner or a little bit more intermediate because it is a diagonal setting. The good news is it's a small diagonal setting. I'm going to walk you through it. It's going to be great. And if you've never sewn a quilt top before in a diagonal setting, it's exactly the same principle. So we're going to learn about putting a diagonal setting together, even if, even though it's a tiny, small square of such. And we're only making 4 of those. So it's okay. We're just going to take our time. We're going to go really slow, and we're going to have a great time. So why don't you stick around and let's make block 4 and block 16. All right, we are back. I just realized how colorful my shirt is, a little bit throwing me off. So I apologize for that, but we're gonna keep it on, right? So let's take a look at the fabrics that I've chosen. So because we're making a slightly smaller block, I'm able to finish some of the block using about a fat eighth of fabric. So I was able to use some of my fat quarters, and I could use some of those fabrics twice. So we're using the same fabrics for block 4 and block 16. I think that's cool. So let's take a look at what we needed for block 16. So here's what I've chosen fabric wise for block number 16, or not block 16, block 4, which is the Primrose block. This is our big one. So it takes 5 fabrics. Shelley did 3 different reds, a small scale white or cream background print, and then a background. So this is what I've chosen. My outside red is going to be this guy right here. We need a center square of it, and we also, this is kind of how the corners are set up, so I need a little piece of it in the corner. My second fabric, I chose to use blue, and if you look at the fabric, it's got blue and red in it, but it also has this touch of green, and I thought that would make a nice addition because we have some sprig blocks and some leaflet blocks that'll help bring the green into the quilt a little bit and make it make sense. Our third fabric is going to be this red fabric right here. This one, another little print from the same collection, but you see they aren't a different color, they're just a different scale of print. So I definitely wanted to break it up with this blue. This is going to be making up our star center. The star itself is going to be made out of this fabric. This is our tiny print, and I chose the flags this time. And then, of course, we have our backgrounds. We have all our pieces cut out of our background. So let's look at what it's going to take to make our forget-me-not block. So this one I actually laid out the block a little bit so you could see it. So again, we're using that center square is our little print. We're also using the same blue. I think in Shelley's quilt she uses a teal as the forget-me-not, but blue works really well for the forget-me-not. And then we have our backgrounds, and our backgrounds this time are all made of triangles. So if you look, we have our center square, of our forget-me-not, and we have each one of the sides of our center square is surrounded by our blue square. This is how our quilt is kind of built. Then we have, in quilt terms, if we're looking at this like a tiny quilt, we have our setting triangles. So our setting triangles are going to be slightly bigger than our corner triangles, but we have setting triangles, and these are going to work with those blocks to get everything sort of set into that diagonal setting. And then we have a slightly smaller triangle for each of the corners. So we literally are treating this like a small diagonal set quilt. We're just doing it from little pieces so we can put it together in a square. And then we're going to trim it to size afterwards, and we're going to be really careful about the trimming, and I'm going to walk you through that part as well. So now that we've seen the fabrics that we're using, we've had a chance to look at the two blocks that are over my shoulder, I think we're totally ready to get over to the sewing machine and start working step by step on both of these blocks. So we're going to start with the Primrose block, block number 4, and then we're going to move on after we get a handle on ourselves a little bit. We're going to move on to the Forget-Me-Not block, which is our small one, and we'll knock those out. It'll be great. So before we get started, I just wanted to tell you the last time we met and I worked on block number 3, I noticed that my sample square and the one that I sewed together with you, 2 separate blocks, they were slightly different sizes. Well, when I was stitching them, I did it at 2 different times and I turned the machine off in between. And one of the things that I do is I align my machine each time with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I think I was just a hair off on aligning it with one of the blocks. Maybe I forgot. Maybe it got turned off and turned back on, and I was working on something else and didn't think about it. But it begs in mind that I really wanted to remind you that each one of these blocks, when you sit down at your sewing machine, you do want to check your 1/4 inch seam. And so today I want to kind of show you how I set up the machine and how I'm going to prevent that little mistake from happening. It's not a lot, it's only a little tiny bit, and I'm really not worried about it. And I will show you some of the easing process when we start to put the sections together, because there are ways that you can kind of solve this problem and easing using the same type of technique that we're going to use to put borders on. If you've seen the border video in my Beginner Quilting 101 class, you'll know that I measure 3 times through the center of the quilt because things do shift and things happen. And so in measuring sort of a 1/3 down and then through the center and then a 1/3 away from the end again, sometimes you get 3 different measurements, which we average to cut that part out. And then we kind of ease that little, sometimes it's a difference of about a 1/4 inch, sometimes a 1/2 inch. We ease that out to a solid measurement. And what that helps to do is it sort of takes a quilt that is unsquare and it eases it out to square it up. So rather than holding up something that you did and like maybe the bottom is a little smaller than the top, it creates this sort of triangle, or you get these wavy pieces to your quilt. So how to avoid doing that is by easing the proper measurement out. And so if you measure 3 times through the center of the quilt and stitch your borders on, it takes like a couple seconds extra time, really, but it makes a huge difference in the finished product of the quilt. It makes everything come out much more square. So if you've ever made a quilt or seen a quilt that was really not square and it didn't quite hang right and it looked really ripply and everything, but you've seen another quilt that looks like perfect, first off, they're not perfect. but they look that way because it trains the eye. They look a lot more square. And that is somebody who took the time to properly measure their borders before they put them on. So you don't overcut your border, stitch it, and then fold it and trim it. That doesn't, it can make problems in the quilt more enhanced. So I'm not saying it can cause problems, but it can greatly enhance issues within the center of the quilt. So when we get to putting the quilt together, I'm going to show you how to ease some of these things. I'm not super concerned about it. I thought about taking it apart and redoing it, but I'm really not going to do that. So today you may see that in some of these other blocks, and you may see me easing things together. And if that's the case, you know, then you learn kind of how to ease and what to really be worried about and what to not be worried about when you're putting the block together. So let's get over to the sewing machine and we'll get started on the Primrose block. So starting with step 1 in the book, we're going to do our corners, and that's going to be these hefty rectangles, the smaller rectangles, and those fabric 1 squares. So these would be, oh gosh, this would be fabric number B labeled. This is I and this is H. Okay, we're going to put those together. So the first step is to take your B fabric and your I fabric, lay them together. Oops, I got 2. And we're going to stitch them together with a 1/4 inch seam. Oh, before we get started, let's look at how I've set up the sewing machine. So this time, what I did is I turned the machine off and turned it back on. I have a single hole foot plate here. Let me take this foot off so you can see it. I have a single hole foot plate here, and that keeps the points of triangles from being drug in. So instead of having that wide angled foot plate, because things have a tendency to get stuck in there and cause issues, especially on this machine. This is my backup machine, and sometimes it has trouble with points. So you can avoid that sometimes by using remember the sewing pig that we've talked about a few times in my videos. So you can use a sewing pig, which is kind of a leader that starts everything out. This sewing plate has a single hole, which means when I turn the sewing machine on and off, I'm going to get the standard default needle position when I turn it off and turn it back on. And that default needle position is going to go right down through that single hole in the single hole plate. Okay, that's what we have going on there. All right. So what I have done, if you see the diagonal seam tape, and I know we've talked about this before, it comes on a roll. I'm going to show you how I use the diagonal seam tape today. And what I've done is I've taped it starting from the needle position towards me. This red line is where the needle is. So I don't have to follow up to where the needle is. That's where it is. And this black line on either side is a 1/4 inch from that needle position. To the inside of the black line is a scant 1/4. To the outside of the black line is a slightly bulky 1/4. So that's where our 1/4 inch seam allowance lives. So this seam tape is great. And if you lay your ruler on top of it and lay that through the center line, you can see I'm going to get a scant 1/4 inch if I stay to the inside of the line, or I'm going to get a regular 1/4 inch to the outside of the line. So we're going to be right along the outside of that black line when I sew, and I'm definitely going to get the 1/4 inch. That's the first thing to make sure that I have an accurate 1/4 inch. And the other reason I use this tape, I will show you when we get to the diagonal part, which is lining up the point of a triangle or of a square with the needle, and then the other end of the square runs along this red line, and that's how I'm able to sew diagonals without drawing on the backs of all the squares. So that's why this is very handy tape. I run it all the way down for big blocks and things, all the way down the front of even my my table add-on. And then what I do is any place there's a door, like here where I put my bobbin thread in, anywhere there's a door, I just take my scissors and just score a line. And that way, when I move this, I can take that off and I don't have to worry about that tape. I can pop this off. Oops, I didn't score the top. I just put a new piece on. So, but you just score the top, and that way I can take off the bobbin holder, I can take off the sole plate, any of those things, and I'm not going to disturb that line. Okay, so that's where the diagonal seam tape comes in. I know I've talked about it before, but Aligning your 1/4 of an inch seam is incredibly important when we're starting to talk about blocks with lots of pieces like we're talking about. And if you know you have a solid line here that you can follow, then you're going to be good to go, and you're not going to have to worry about all the things going on with your seams. All right, so I'm going to align my square here with my other rectangle. I'm going to place it under the foot and then run it right along that black line, and that's how I know I'm going to get my 1/4 inch seam. And I'm going to do some chain piecing today. This is a very messed up foot. I don't know why it keeps cocking things weird, but it does. I might have to change my foot. But I definitely want you to see through a clear foot so you know what I'm doing. Aligning up, putting it on my 1/4 inch seam, and I'm just going to keep stitching. And I'm chain piecing today. So chain piecing is all about just continuing to sew. If you have a machine that has a thread cutter, you'll use a little less thread. But if you don't have that, taking each piece out and moving it and all that wastes a lot of thread and a lot of cutting time. And so if we can just keep on sewing, they wind up chaining itself together. They're all together in one big piece. So if they fall down behind the sewing machine or back down the wall or something, it's not a big deal because I can pull them right back out. So that's what the chain piecing is for. And when I pull them forward, I got them all connected together. And we can do lots of chain piecing today. You're going to see it today. And then there is a press line. So she recommends pressing to, in this case, to the dark, away from the background, which I highly recommend because the background's light. So we're going to press everything this way, seam. So I'll press these and we'll add the top. So to finish the corners, we're just going to attach the rectangle to the top of what we just made, the unit we just made. So I'm just going to align these together. They align perfectly, which tells me my 1/4 inch seam is right. So that's good. Now would be a great time to test that. If you find that your piece here that you piece together is too long or too short, that's a good time to adjust your 1/4 inch seam before we start getting too far into the block, right? All right, let's get these sewn. All right, we got those all sewn. I'm going to cut them apart because I chain pieced them. And then I'm going to press them, and Shelley's directions say to press this up. So the seam allowance will go up. So we're going to press those, come back, go to the next step. All right, those are done. And while I'm talking to you about accuracy, so pressing, if you've got, here are some just beginners, not having your seam allowance controlled. Also, if you've pressed something and then you pull it apart and there's like a little seam or a fold or whatever, you have not pressed it properly. That is an issue. So nice clean pressing. And what you want to do is lay your iron, press your iron down before you fold it up to set the thread in the fabric, and then pull it up and go like that. And the other thing you don't want to do is steam press at this point. So while you're putting your blocks together, you don't really want to use steam. I am both a dry iron and a steam presser. So when I use my steam is when I open up a fat quarter and it's got wrinkles and I want to iron it within an inch of its life to get it flat. That's when I'm going to use steam. And then when I'm in between blocks, I'm dry iron pressing, because if you press with steam and you push at all, especially if you have bias, it's going to make it wonky. And a good indicator that you've been pressing incorrectly is that the block is the right size in one direction, but too big or too small in another direction. That can be a pressing issue, not just a seam issue, because if it's right in one direction, your seams are probably right. It could be that you steam pressed it and you kept pressing in one direction. So it's very common that we kind of press like this at an angle, and we do it with the block that's upright. So the block gets really wide and not as tall. So that's a good indicator. So those are just things to think about while we're talking about these things. So that is step one. Those are our corners. They go on last. I'm going to set those aside. Step two, using our C block in our blue. So here are my C blocks in blue color. And then we also are going to need these squares of color 3. These are going to be our E units. And we're going to need squares of our background that are our J units. That's what we're going to be working on step 2 and step 3. And we're going to be making half in one direction and half in the other direction. So right now, I'm making one block. So I have 8 of these squares, right? I'm going to set 4 of them aside. And same thing with these. I'm going to set 4 of these over here with this. And then I'm going to set these 4 blocks here with 4 of these squares. And we'll set these aside because these come later. And we're only going to concentrate on the 2 differences. So step 2, we'll set these aside. These are for step 3. Step 2, I am going to take these squares and I'm going to sew one of these red squares in the bottom right corner. Only the bottom right, okay? And I'm going to sew diagonally from side to side, right? You don't want to go this way. You definitely want to go this way. All right, so I'm going to sew them diagonally. I'm going to lay my needle down here at the point. Here's where this diagonal seam tape comes in hand. So you see where the red square right here meets this red line? That is that's the seam, that's the needle position. So if I lay my square up here where the needle can get to it in the point and start sewing, but the whole time I'm sewing, I keep the point of this triangle on that red line. When I get all the way up here to the needle, guess what happens? I'm sewing right through the point. So now I have sewed perfectly diagonally through that square, but I didn't have to mark on the back of the square. So that's why I recommend the diagonal seam tape. I'm going to do the same thing, lay to the bottom right corner. Now, if I want to chain piece these together, I can't really lay them like this because I don't want to sew them together. So I'm going to turn this one around so that the edges fit. I'm still sewing the same direction, I'm just doing it from the other side. So if you see me do this, that's why, because I'm chain piecing, so I'm having to turn it around, but I'm still sewing in the correct direction, okay? That might not make sense to you at first, but I'm going to chain piece these. So I'm just keeping that triangle, that point of that square, right there on the red line. And you may not have noticed, you may have, but in the description box of all these videos, I have a running list of products that I talk about, and diagonal seam tape has been on there since the very beginning because this is why I use it. Now I have sewn all of those. And to keep you from being confused, because there is a reason why this is step 2 and we set step 3, we're going to continue finishing all of step 2, then we're going to move to step 3. Okay, we're not going to do it all at the same time. So I have all of my squares here with my square here in the bottom, so I'm going to press it. So this is a stitch and flip. I'm going to press and trim out the bulk from the back. So let's do that. So for the purpose of this video, since we don't have many blocks to do, I'm not going to get my cutting mat out and do this. I'm just going to trim these with scissors in the back, okay? And all I'm doing is pulling the front out of the way, and I'm just trimming the bulk, the leftover seam allowance out of the back so we don't have that much fabric. So this is what the first part of this is going to look like. Then what we're going to do is we're going to take these squares of white, and eventually we're going to put one in each corner. They're going to cross each other like that to make the angle, okay? But we have to sew them all on one side first because they cross each other. So I'm just going to go to the upper left corner, and I'm going to stitch corner to corner all of these. So again, I'm going to put my point right there in my needle to start. There it goes. Hopefully it won't get sucked down in there. And my other square point's going to run right along the red line. All right, let's get these all sewn. All right, I'm done with those 4. I got to clip my chain piecing apart. If you didn't chain piece, you don't have to do this part. We're going to press these up, trim out the bulk, then we're going to add the square to the other side. So let's go press these. There we go. And now we will stitch it on the other side. Basically what you want is you're going to have the 2 whites making an angle with this bottom triangle in the lower right hand side. So that's what we're doing. All right, that's how you want this block to look, this unit of the block to look. We're going to cut these apart. Same thing, press, and then cut out the bulk. I'm getting quite a pile of little triangles here. All right, that's what your unit is supposed to look like. 2 triangles at the top. It sort of looks like a little angled rectangle, right? 2 whites at the top, 1 red in the lower right-hand corner. That is step 2, all complete. There's the units from step 2. So we're going to set these aside. Now we're going to work on step 3. And how is it different? Well, now we're going to sew a little red square into the lower left-hand side of the square. And it does matter. And I did these separately so that when we go to add the triangles at the top, you don't get confused. Okay? That's why they're different steps. Sometimes she separates them so that you don't get into the habit of sewing them incorrectly. Obviously, if you sew into one corner, it doesn't matter in the first step. So if you wanted to, in step 2, you could sew them all into the same corner. But when you go to add the triangles at the top, you have to make sure they're oriented correctly. So that's why we're going to do it as a step 2 and a step 3. Okay? Same story. Cut apart, press, trim out the bulk. All right, now when we add our squares to the top to make our triangles, right, we're having this guy in the lower left corner, and then we're going to add the triangles to the top. So you see how it can get very confusing if you don't pay attention to the drawing. So we're just going to lay I'm doing the tops the same way I did, first the left, then the right. You can do it any way you want, but that's how I'm choosing to do it. So this time I'm going to lay it on top here. Same thing, we're going corner to corner. And I'm always laying my block down the way it shows in the book. It's the easiest way to keep from getting confused. And if you have a life that is anything like mine, you have dogs coming in while you're sewing, you might have kids depending on your age. I don't have any kids anymore, I have dogs. And I have a husband who we both work from home. So he will often run in here to tell me something. Like today, today, we just put in a fence. And when they put in the fence, they cut the internet. So right now, he may run in here to tell me the internet's up or the internet's not up or whatever the case may be. And I'm just going to go, oh, okay, dear. But you can forget what you were sewing when, and it can really foul you up. And when you're doing stitch and flip and you're cutting out the bulk, if you make a mistake and you don't notice it before you cut it, well, then you got to make the block again. And that really stinks. So it's just easier if you keep everything in line the way it's shown in the book, right? All right, the bulk's all trimmed out. I'm going to do the other corner. Remember, this is lower left, so we need this other corner up here. I know I keep reminding you, but I'm trying to keep you on track so you don't make a mistake. We're going to stitch corner to corner on these squares. And again, once we finish these corners, we're just going to press and flip and cut out the bulk. All right, step number 4, where we add these 2 things together to make our units. So let me go back to step 2 units and step 3 units. And what we're going to do is we're going to stitch these together. This is the first part of step 4. We're going to make these guys into a bigger triangle, just like that, okay? So we're going to lay them together and sew the sides together like this. Now we want these triangle points to meet. Here's my little tip. You're going to take a pin. You're going to put it right here in the corner where those seams all meet, right there in that point. And then you're going to reach over and put the other end of the pin right in the point where they meet on the other square, okay? And that helps you align those centers. The centers are now aligned, and then all you have to do is align your sides. And if they're not perfect, it's not a big deal. I'm going to sew all the way down, probably helping, because they're very bulky right here, with the edge of my scissors nowhere near the needle, again, because I have this weird funky foot on here, and I know what's going to happen when I go to sew this. I'm going to have to lift this foot and tuck underneath. It's this funky foot that I have on here. And I'm going to get close to that point. I'm not going to sew over the pin. I'm going to pull the pin out. But I have it all aligned, so it should work. Go right down through that 1/4 inch seam spot. Let's hope. Ooh, look at that. Nice. Okay. Now, let me see. Oh, she does have it. Okay. I was checking her pressing instructions to make sure it'd be the same as mine. You have 2 points here that are meeting. If I fold to one side, it's going to be bulky, the other side same. So this is one of those circumstances where you're going to want to open this seam up, okay? And we're going to get that ready for the second half of step 4. So we're going to do that to all 4 pieces, and I will use that little pin trick because that's a good spot where you want to be aligned. I'm going to use that little pin trick every time I do one of these. We've got our units together. Now we need these long skinny pieces. And those long skinny pieces are going to go on the top. And that's what's going to give us our height to match to our corners. So for the long skinny pieces, we got a lot of piecing in here. We've got 2 blocks together. We've got some stitch and flip. So what I like to do is I like to align the corners because little things can happen. So much like we have with our borders, that's what our block should measure. And then we take it and we kind of see if we have any gaps or problems. This block doesn't, but that doesn't mean it won't happen with other units. So I start the unit pinned to the top, get a couple of stitches in. I'm also going to put this needle down. Take your pin out, and then you can come back here to the part where your other pin is. Make sure your seams are laying flat. Make sure this is aligned properly, and you can ease it if you have any gapping or anything like that. You can ease this part down so it looks neater and it's measured properly. And then her block shows, her press diagram shows going up, so we didn't knock off any of our points. And absolutely, definitely you want to press top. So we're going to go ahead and press that. And that's the end unit for 4. So let's finish that stack and set these aside. There's one of those times when I have to do a little bit of easing. You see, if I lay this down like this, I'm going to cut off a little bit of the point. So I'm kind of, not tugging, but just kind of easing that back into spot. So I can get it sewn properly and the seam allowance looks nice. All right, let's go to step 5. Step 5 involves these guys right here and some of these little squares for my center. So this is unit D and this is unit F. And we're going to make some flip or stitch and flip flying geese. So I'm going to align my square up against my rectangle, and I'm going to sew from one corner of the rectangle to the side of the rectangle. Again, aligning this needle and line. The first one's always the hardest, I think. There we go. And I'm going to do that on the same side of this, just for grins and giggles. I'm going to line it up with the same side each time. Stitch, flip, cut out the bulk, and then the other side. But I'm trying to be very, very consistent with my stitching. I also hit all of the fabrics in this, the fat quarters especially. When I did the fabric, I sprayed it with a little bit of magic spray. I will put that in the description box as well. I'll show you what it looks like once I get up again. But I got magic spray is really great, and you can spray. It's like a starch, but it can layer. That's what I like about it. So the more, if you spray it again, it gets a little stiffer. You spray it again, it gets a little stiffer, and it adheres to. You probably can't tell, but this is pretty stiff. It adheres to the fibers of the fabric until you wash it. So it's like a stiff starch, depending on how many layers you put on it, and it just keeps bias from stretching and getting out of whack. So now that I've done that, I'm going to press and cut out the bulk from the back. When we add our second square, it's going to be on the opposite side of our rectangle, and we're going to sew. Remember, we're going to sew from the bottom corner, and we're going to cross ourselves. So just try to remember not to go in the opposite direction, and you should be good. I'm actually going to sew this way to start. Once we cut these apart, press, trim, these units are done, and we're on to our last unit. All right, our flying geese units are complete. We're going to set those aside, and we're going to work on step 6. Step 6 is a square and a square. So I'm going to use the leftover squares from these sections. Those were F's, and this is our A square. So for our A square, we're going to take 2 squares, put one in opposite corner, stitch. You can do, if you're doing both your blocks at the same time, you can do both of these at the same time. I'm doing one. So I'm putting squares in opposite corners. Once you're done with those, you're going to flip, press, cut out the bulk, and then do the other opposite corners. So many little triangles. All right, then the opposite corners. Lay this one down. The reason you do that is because you cross yourself. So you have to do them one at a time, but because they're not touching through the center, you can do opposite corners. It saves you a little bit of time, a little bit of cutting. All right, we are on to step 7. And step 7 starts with our square and a square block that we just made. Then we're going to take our flying geese that we made, and we're going to attach those, and we're also going to use some E squares, and we're going to make this whole quilt center. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take a goose, white to white, with the 2 red points facing each other, and we're going to sew one goose to one side and then another one to the opposite side. Okay? Ooh, I got a little edge here that kind of went a little wonky. That's okay. I'm going to do the same thing to the other side so we can get this guy done. So that's the center. Now, in order to do the top and the bottom to finish our star, we have to add a red square to each side of the 2 remaining flying geese. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to add a red square to one side, and then we'll go back and add it to the other side. All right, so for the ends of these, she wants you to press the seams out. So we're going to do that. Then the last part in step 7 is to add your points here of the star to the top and the bottom. So we're going to do that. We're going to lay this down. And because we pressed our seams opposite, we can nest them. So I'm going to put a pin in. I'm going to nest my seam right there, going in opposite directions. And I'm going to do it on the other side. That's where my pinning's going to be. I'm not going to bother pinning the others because they look great right now. They're just nice and aligned in the corner. But I did pin in those 2 seams so they look nice. Right? And if you want to pin, oh, my foot pedal's making another great escape. If you want to pin all the way across, you can. Especially if you're getting confident with your seams. It helps to keep it from shifting. So that's not a bad idea. I pinned at an angle. Can you see here again that I aligned my 1/4 inch seam. Well, when you get here to this little, I'm going to lift and put that underneath. When you get here, just be careful not to go over your 1/4 inch. It's very bulky there. And then when I pin it at an angle about 1/4 inch away from the seam line. I can run my sewing machine with my needle down in the seam line and pull the pin out without running over it. So that's why I do that. And at an angle. See how that looks? And so when you pin that way and you're able to put your needle down, that's where you get those nice crisp edges where they meet. So let's do that. And then I believe she says to press out. Yeah, we're pressing out. So we're going to put this one down like that. Again, I am going to nest the seams. Here's how I put my pin in. 1/4 inch, there's the seam right there. 1/4 inch away from the seam. Add an angle up into the seam, which holds those 2 seams together until I stitch them. So that's how my little pinning technique is. 1/4 inch away and up into the seam. So see, the stitch line is here. right? And I'm away from the stitch line, so I can put my needle down in here without hitting that pin and pull that pin out. And I'm right-handed, so the pins are at an angle for me to pull them out. So this is the end of step 7, which is our star center. So I'm just going to set this, the next thing we're going to do is, in order to finish the block, we have to kind of do what we did with this section. So we're going to have the units that we made in step 4. I'm going to take 2 of them and I'm going to put them on either side of the star. And then we're going to use 2 more with the corners and add the rows on the outside. So let's add the side sections. And I'm just going to align. There's no seams to really meet. So I'm just going to align the blocks and make sure I don't have to ease anything. I don't think I do. So you can pin them. I would recommend pinning, especially if you're a beginner or a confident beginner. And pin your blocks. Even if you're an intermediate and you want everything to not shift, pinning is always a good thing. I'm not going to do that. Okay. Just going to carefully come across those bulky seams. Very nice. Very nice. The match is good. So that looks nice. We're going to do the same thing the other side. Okay, so that part's done. So now we need to create the strips for the top and the bottom. So here's the other 2 of those step 4 sections. And here's the corners. So one of these. And then something to remember. So this is what the corner looks on this side, but when you get to this side, you want to shift it. Those squares face into the center, okay? So that's what it should look like. We're going to make 2 of these, and we're pressing the seams on this side out, okay? So these go out. Last step is to take this, oops, I'm going to move that one, is to take the 2 top and bottoms and sew them together. So I'm going to lay them down, matching up the seams. There are some nested seams here, so I'm going to pin it so it looks nice and it aligns properly. Same thing on this side. I look in the center to see if there's any seams I need to meet in the center. There are not. I am going to align the sides. You can pin them if you'd like. These look pretty good, actually, so I don't think I'm going to pin them. But I definitely going to pin here because that's the point at which everything comes together and where the seams are nested, and that will be the part that will be the most obvious if it's not working. I'm also going to, because this is a long seam in the center, just making sure that we don't have any easing to do. Everything is aligned properly so we can stitch it. And I know we're going to run over a couple of little bulky points, so I'm just going to be a little bit more cautious right there in the center. And then stop right here with my needle in the seam, pull the pin out, and then I can finish the block. It looks as though there's meeting seams here, but they're not. One's an angle and one's straight, so I'm not going to worry about pinning those. There we go. And for this one, we're going to open these up and press them out, and our primrose block is complete. There it is. Yay us. We got that done. So because I finished the first one off camera and this one on camera, my primrose blocks are done. And I'm going to set those aside, and then we're going to work on the Forget-Me-Nots 16. This one's going to be an easy tutorial, and we'll trim them over at the big table, and we'll look at this one full on when we get over to the big table. Okay, here is the layout again for the Forget-Me-Not block. I'm going to take just the rows here. So this is made up of your center is your B. These 4 here are your A units from 16. These side units are C and the corners are D. Okay, so that's what we're working with. And I'm going to take one. We're going to do one on camera so you can see it. So I'm going to take, if you look in the book, you will see that things are on a diagonal setting. And that's exactly how we're going to sew it. So I'm going to try to lay it out here as best I can in the diagonal so that we can kind of pick the rows up. So what we're going to do, this is an on point setting. So this would be the top bottom of the block, the way we're looking at it. But because these rows are set on point, meaning the points are upright instead of the square level of the block, we have to sew them in diagonal rows. So from this camera angle, you can probably see really well that we have 3 distinct rows plus the points at the top and the bottom. So the first thing we're going to do is ignore this top corner. That's technically row 1, but we're going to ignore that top corner. We're going to start here. And we have a center square, and then we have 2 triangles on the outside. And the thing to remember about the setting triangles, the skinny point, so this would be the 2 wide angles, right? The skinny point's going to be in. It's going to be facing the inner part of the block, okay? And so we get a short side, and then the diagonal long side is the part that's going to go down the side of the quilt, or in this case, down the side of the block. So we're going to start the row by stitching a short side and a square, and we're going to align the square into this 90-degree point here at the triangle, okay? And we're going to stitch it right here, 1/4 inch seam. We are not going to tug or stretch these pieces because they are bias. This part right here is bias, which means it's stretchy. Already fibers are coming off of it, so we do not want to stretch it. When we're done with that, we're going to put this one here, and we're going to align it again on this bottom corner of the square right in the 90, just like that, and stitch it down. And that's essentially like the upper corner of our block or the upper corner of our quilt if we were sewing a diagonal quilt setting. Now, I'm just making sure I'm following her diagrams because I know how I would press it. She says to press the seams out. So we're basically going to be really careful. Again, we're touching the non-bias. We're not touching the outside. We're touching the non-bias, and we're just going to press both seams away from the blue. Okay? Let's do that. All right, we've got these little niblets at the top, which a lot of people call dog ears, and we're going to ignore those. And because this is our first official row, we can now add the corner, okay? So what we're going to do with the corner is the corner gets aligned to the top of this square. We are ignoring the dog ears. We're aligning to the top of the square. Now, I like to just eyeball it, but to keep it nice and straight and exactly the way it's supposed to be, you want it to have exactly the same amount of dog ear on either side of that square. And if that is a struggle for you, we take these 2 points and we create a finger press line in the center of the square. Again, we're not touching the bias. We lay our triangle down on top, and then I have a line there that I created, and that line should match the point of the triangle. There it is. The point of the triangle is in the center of that line, which means it's now in the center of that blue square, and I should have equal alignment. Then I'm going to stitch it. And I'm not going to stretch. That's a bias. I'm not going to stretch it. I'm just going to put my needle down, and I'm going to let the machine carry it right through very carefully on my 1/4 inch. Take it out, and I'm going to flip it up and press it. Okay, let's do that. There's the corner of our block. Now, you may say, oh gosh, they're not aligned in a straight line. Some designers will design so that everything is aligned perfectly straight, and some designers will have you trim afterwards. The first block that I did for her, it was a little oversized, and the whole point is you don't want these little points right here cut off, so she's actually given you a little more than a 1/4 inch so that we can trim out the bulk of this. So don't worry about those little dog ears or it not being perfectly aligned, but the idea here is that you're getting a straight, this is the corner of the block, so we're getting a straight corner here, okay? I'm going to set that one aside. Then I'm going to work on the next row. Now this next row has 3 squares, but it also has these 2 triangles on the end. because it just happens to be equal parts, and it's the other opposite corners of the block. When you're having a quilt, if the quilt is completely square, you'll have a row that looks like this. Most of the time, it's not square, it's oblong. So one will have a corner and a side setting triangle, and then the opposite row will have the opposite, something like that. So it'll look a little different. But the idea here is that eventually you got to come straight across the quilt, right? So we're going to do the alignment of the outside triangle. You can add the triangles last if you want, but why not just sew it together in a row? And again, if you're confused, fold your square in half, finger press it, okay? Lay your triangle out on one end, align your point with that finger press line, and you can kind of see that I have the same dog ear on both sides. That's what I'm going to press. Don't stretch it. Lay it down gently under the machine and kind of let the machine guide it under. Don't pull it. It is a bias. Okay? That's done. We got our first point. Now we're going to add the next square. Easy peasy, aligned. 1/4 inch seam. Open that up. Next square, blue. Hers are teal, mine are blue. Yours can be anything you want. Triangle. Okay? I'm just going to align mine. That would be how you do it. You just... By the way, if you're noticing that the light gets dimmer and brightens, you're not going nuts. I have an iron next to me, and every time the iron clicks on, it dims the light on the sewing machine, so you're not going nuts. All right, so pressing for this one, she wants us to press the seams here into the center square. So I'm pressing those in, and I'm pressing these out. And that way they'll nest with the next row. So that's what I'm going to do. Now we're going to do the bottom. The bottom is exactly as this one up here. It's just upside down. But we're going to align the square right here in this 90-degree angle on the sides of this triangle without pulling on the sides or the bottom, and stitch it that way. Remember, your little dog point ears go to the bottom now, not the top. They're like little, what do they call that? The dog with the really pointy, well, there's so many. Doberman Pinscher, straight up ears. Fair alert. Okay, remember we're pressing those out, so we'll press those out really fast. If you ever get confused where to press, Shelley puts all the arrows in. So we're just following the arrows. And then this one goes right on the top across the dog ears. And it's not aligned. There we go. Okay, we'll put that one on the top. There it goes. Those are the 3 rows that we have to put together, and this one's going to go together pretty easy. So we take our top row, put it down to our next row, and because we followed the pressing instructions, I've got a nested seam here, and I've got a nested seam here. Okay, so I'm going to pin like I do all nested seams, and then we're going to leave the dog ears on the outside, not tugging or anything like that. We're pressing and we're sewing our 1/4 inch seam allowance, stopping at the seam, pulling the pin out. Same on the other side. Look at that. Beautiful. All right, and then we're pressing away from the center for this one. She has them all going in the same direction, but I'm going to veto that. So just press away from the center, do the same thing on the other side. So let's do that. All right, same thing on the bottom. So I'm just going to turn it around so I can pin it. I like having the small piece on the top so I can look at it. So we're nesting our seams. So I'm going to pin. And on this side, nested seam, pin. Those are where it counts. Those little nested seams are where they count. And then we're just going to align our triangles nicely without tugging along the bottom there. and start sewing your 1/4 inch seam. All right, there it is. And it might look a little messy because it's got all the dog ears, but we're going to take it over to the overhead camera and I'm going to show you how best to trim it without screwing it up, right? Okay, so let's take our forget-me-not block over to the overhead cam. Man, it must feel really good to almost be done, right? So I'm going to put our little primrose block up. They're beautiful. Absolutely. And then let's look at our little forget-me-not block. Oh, also, before I forget, I pulled this away from the sewing machine. So this is a little bottle, but this is the quilting and crafting spray that I was mentioning, the magic that I use to stiffen the fabrics a little bit. And when you're working with bias, I think this is a great little product. I will link it in the description box. This is a great little product. So it sprays on like a starch, helps you get your wrinkles out. You do a layer, press it. You want to dry iron press this, by the way, because it is water soluble. So if you're pressing it with steam, you're kind of defeating the purpose. You spray this on, you press your fabric, it starches, spray it again, gets a little stiffer, spray it again, gets a little stiffer. So you can do a few squirts on it and press it, and you'll actually notice that the fabric is very stable. If you're working with triangles, before you cut your triangles out, not after, before you start cutting your fabric, if you spray it with this, it'll help hold those bias seams together and keep them from stretching. It doesn't prevent them from stretching completely, but it helps to stabilize the threads and the fibers just a little bit before you wash them so that they're not as, they don't have as much of a tendency to start peeling away and stretching while you're working with them. So this is a great little product. There it is right there. That's what it looks like. They come in much bigger bottles. Tighten up a little bit so we can look at the lines on our ruler so we can really get the cutting done. All right, I have a Creative Grids ruler, which means one side of the ruler is whole numbers and the other side of the ruler is half numbers. I really like these rulers, and this is exactly the reason why. So I don't have to guess where the numbers are on this ruler. So I know that this black line right here is the 4.5 inch mark, and I know each one of these little white lines here are the 1/4 inch marks. The white lines might be difficult for you to see when they're not on the fabric, but there they are right there. So what I'm going to do, I know that if I lay this ruler in here in the center of the block, I can see that this block is 4.5, it's over 4.5 inches, and I have trimmable space all the way around the outside. So I want to kind of leave it in the center to look at it just a minute. And I am right-handed, so I'm working on the right hand and the top of the block at the same time. So I just want to make sure that the 4.5 line is completely encased in the block. And I'm going to move this side of the ruler over a little bit so that the white line, this 1/4 inch line, is running right along where those points are that I don't want to cut off. And I'm going to do the same thing up here. I'm going to raise the ruler a little bit so that, making sure that I'm still within the 1/4 inch mark. I'm going to raise the ruler so that I've got white line here. And I still want to make sure that I'm inside here. I've got good coverage. I'm a 1/4 inch away from all these points. If you're larger than 1/4 inch away, you're good. If you're smaller, this is the point at which it can go wrong. So I have aligned myself so that my 1/4 inch lines are not cutting off any of the points that I have here. I'm adjusting it a little bit because I just moved it with my hand. So I have plenty of space here. I'm not going to cut off any points. And I'm not going to cut off the top, and I'm not going to cut off the side. And so now I'm going to press my hand down. I am going to trim the side of the block and the top of the block. And I have a square point on two sides. So now I'm going to turn it, and I'm going to lay my ruler down at the 4.5 inch mark. And again, I'm going to check. My points over here are a 1/4 inch away. I'm a little low on the side. I'm trying not to lean into the camera so you stare at the top of my head again. I'm just moving. And I've got 1/4 inch seam allowance on both sides of this block, and it's aligned with my 1/4 inch lines. And now I'm going to trim the other side and the other top. There we go. I have a 4.5 inch square, which is the unfinished size of this block, 4 inches when it goes into the quilt. And it's all ready to go, and it's all trimmed, and it looks perfect. And I have my 1/4 inch seam allowances intact. So that's how you really do have to align. You have spots point to point in all over this block to make it straight. You have lines to check here to make sure your 1/4 inches aren't going to get hacked off and all of that. And you just trim all this stuff off. And the way Shelley did her measurements, that's exactly how I'm assuming she wants to do it, because the block is oversized when it's finished. Congratulations! We just made it through 2 squares. So I have made 2 of these. I made both of the blocks because I made, one of each before we started, so I knew where you might have some issues. And then we made 2 together. So I have 2 more forget-me-nots to make. Not a big deal. And I will be all caught up. So again, since we're only making 4 of these, and there's not a lot of seams in these. I know it can be a challenge for someone who's maybe a beginner. This could feel like a little bit of a challenge, but I think it's an easy block to do, and it's small. You have to make 4 of them, and you only have to make 2 of these, and these went together pretty quickly. So all I'm saying is now is a good time. If you need a little bit of time this month to catch up, you can totally do that. And hopefully I have alerted you to any potential issues that might come up. And so pay attention to the angles at which you're putting things on in the guide. Pay attention to the seam pressing arrows this time, because we have a lot of bulk. We have a lot of points. Both of these blocks have an air of being set on point. It's the way the stitch and flip went. So they're going to have a lot of little angled seams in here. And so paying attention to those pressing arrows is really important. So I hope this was helpful. Thanks for coming back and visiting me. I'm sorry we had a little break, but sometimes that happens. I will come back next week with one of the most requested AI videos that we're going to do with Conrad. So that'll be fun. I did put out a poll, and I want to thank all of you who were reading the poll and commenting and participating in the poll. Is really helpful to me because it helps me understand what you want to learn, which is great. And so Conrad and I are very excited. I speak for Conrad, obviously, that we're very excited to bring you 2 new episodes of Conversations with Conrad. And our 2 biggest choices were what to do with our jelly rolls and also what to do with color and being more confident in your color. So I know he's really excited to get started and come up with some ideas. So, and I will also preview what I finished for the show, so you can see that as well. And don't forget that in addition to all of that, we have other videos on the website you can watch. I have a full beginner series. We have last year's series that we did 100 blocks in 2025. And I have Moose and Squirrel Quilters on YouTube, which I will link in the description box below so that you don't miss it. We did a lovely episode that aired in May. While we were at H&H, we aired an episode with Beth Helfter of Eva Page Quilt Designs, and you don't want to miss that. It's a very cute video on traveling with quilts. So I think you'll probably really love that. And until next time, you can find me at cabinquilters.com. And if you've been to the website, I just want to briefly chat. If you've been to the website and you had any issues whatsoever, we had a disconnection of a USPS plugin. So a lot of you were concerned that you hadn't paid shipping on your products. Most of them I shipped at my cost anyway. We seem to have that fixed now. We had some PDF delivery issues. I don't know why, but I was responding to those individually. And so we have a few delays in that way that we shouldn't have. So those are website issues that are being corrected. We have a backup plan. If we can't get the developer to correct those issues, we'll be going to a new platform. So if you see changes on the website, especially when it comes to the store, not the regular part of the website, but when it comes to the store, just know that that is solely because I don't want you to have any friction or any weird or suspicious things happening in the website when you're trying to order. And that's exactly, I understand if something doesn't work right or something doesn't look right, it's your, like, everybody wants to escape, and I totally get it. But I assure you that cabinquilters.com is a functioning business. It is not a hokey sneaky thing. It's not a scam site. If there is a problem, if you're not getting an answer the way you should, please email me. Please let me know. If you see something hokey with the website, please let me know. Because I'm doing all the things that I do, including posting these videos, I may not catch it. So I really, really appreciate customers who reach out to me and let me know that there's something wrong that we can fix. And I had no idea that we were continuously having issues with our shipping and things like that, or PDF deliveries. That's the worst. And so thank you to all of you customers who are watching and went to the website and told me that there were issues. So I appreciate that. Don't forget, we have retreats going on all the time. Next year, we're going to have some beautiful quilt therapy retreats. I think they're going to be great. We're updating the website next week. And our cruise to Panama in 2027, January of 2027. And the quilt cruise is out. Everybody can see it. It's the Stitch Your Journey quilt. The books will be coming out in August. I'm very excited about it. And we will have other Stitch Your Journey type quilts coming out. So I'm really excited about that. So thank you guys so much for sharing the Flower Farm quilt with me. And I will stop talking and see you guys in the next one.